In the far corners of the galaxy, there existed a race of aliens known as the Tharkor. For centuries, they had thrived on their lush, peaceful planet far from the chaos of the universe. Their civilization was known for its wisdom and advanced technology, but peace, they soon learned, was a fragile thing. The Tharkor were not warriors. They had long abandoned the ways of war, seeking to trade and share knowledge instead. However, all that changed when a dark and deadly force arrived, the Vrakash. A ruthless faction of warlords, the Vrakash swept across the galaxy, conquering everything in their path with their immense power. Their ships were massive and their weapons destructive. Entire planets had been reduced to ashes. The Tharkor watched in horror as the Vrakash advanced toward their world. The Vrakash had already destroyed countless civilizations, and now they had set their sights on the Tharkor. The Tharkor were ill-prepared for war. Their ships, though advanced, were not built for combat. Their soldiers, though skilled in many things, were not trained for battle. It was a hopeless situation. In their panic and desperation, the Tharkor made a decision that would change the course of their history. They would ask for help from anyone willing to listen. The Tharkor sent a distress signal, one that would echo through the stars. It was a cry for help, a desperate plea from a peaceful people who had never known war. The message was simple: we are under attack. We need aid. Please, help us. The Tharkor had no idea who would respond, or if anyone would at all, but they had no other choice. The Vrakash were drawing closer, and their armies were unstoppable. As the distress signal went out, the Tharkor leaders gathered in their Grand Council Hall, waiting for a reply. Who will come to our aid? Asked High Counselor Viral, the leader of the Tharkor. No one will come, said General Zothar, a military leader who had once hoped to protect his people. His voice was filled with dread. The galaxy has turned its back on us. We are alone. But we must try, said Counselor Xena. Even if only one ship arrives, it will be enough to give us a chance. They waited, the silence thick with fear. Hours passed. Then, the unthinkable happened. The signal came. The Tharkor stared in shock as an unexpected response appeared on their screens. It was a transmission from another civilization, a race of beings they had never heard of before. The message was brief but direct. We have received your distress signal. We are on our way. The message ended abruptly, leaving the Tharkor leaders in stunned silence. We are on our way? Counselor Xena repeated, her voice trembling. Who are they? Do they know what they are walking into? We don't know, General Zothar replied, shaking his head. But we must hope they are powerful. Our hope is that they will have the strength to fight back the Vrakash. The Tharkor quickly began preparations. Ships were readied, weapons were gathered, and the people braced for the arrival of their mysterious saviors. They did not know who these beings were, but they prayed that they would bring the strength they so desperately needed. Hours turned into days, and still, no sign of the promised aid came. Anxiety gripped the Tharkor as they wondered if the mysterious ship would ever appear. They had put all their hopes in this unknown ally, but doubts began to creep into their hearts. Then, on the fourth day, it happened. A massive object appeared on the horizon, emerging from the darkness of space. It was like no ship the Tharkor had ever seen. It was not sleek and beautiful like their own ships. It was massive, intimidating, and ancient-looking. Its design seemed almost archaic, and its appearance struck fear into the hearts of the Tharkor. The strange ship slowly approached, its massive hull glowing with a faint, eerie light. The Tharkor watched in awe and fear. This was their salvation, or so they hoped. Is it them? Counselor Xena whispered, her voice barely audible. It must be, General Zothar said, his hand gripping the armrest of his chair. It's the only ship that could arrive this quickly. As the ship drew closer, the Tharkor sent out a communication signal. They needed to know who these beings were and what kind of help they could offer. The response came almost immediately. This is the Vanguard, a vessel of the Human Alliance, a cold, calm voice replied. Human? The word echoed through the Tharkor command center. Humans? But we've never heard of you. You will soon know us, the voice responded. Prepare your forces. We fight together." The Tharkor leaders exchanged uneasy glances. They had expected a fleet of advanced ships, but instead, they had received a single ship, a massive, imposing vessel, but still just one ship, and the humans, whoever they were, had made it clear that they were ready for war. "Are we really to trust these humans?" Counselor Xena asked, her voice shaky. "We have no choice," General Zothar said, his voice firm. "We have to fight, and this ship will either help us or lead to our destruction. There is no middle ground." As the human ship neared their world, the Tharkor readied themselves for what would be the most critical battle of their existence. The Vrakash were still on their way, and the Tharkor now found themselves relying on the mysterious humans to save their world. But as the ship touched down, the Tharkor leaders wondered what kind of aid they had truly received. They had hoped for a fleet of reinforcements, but what they had received was a warship, one ship, ready to fight. The Vrakash were coming, and now, the Tharkor had no choice but to place their trust in the humans. The countdown to battle had begun. The massive human warship, the Vanguard, slowly descended toward the surface of the Tharkor homeworld. Its hull, dark and imposing, seemed to absorb the light around it, casting a shadow over the land below. For the Tharkor, it was both a sight of hope and fear. They had sent their distress signal in desperation, but now, standing on the precipice of an unknown future, they could not shake the feeling that they had invited danger into their midst. On the command deck of the Vanguard, Captain Rachel Lee stood before the giant viewports, watching as the Tharkor S planet grew closer. Her face was calm, her eyes narrowed in focus. The mission was clear: aid the Tharkor and destroy the Vrakash. There was no room for hesitation, no time for diplomacy. The Vrakash would not stop until the Tharkor were wiped out. And the humans? They didn't just fight for survival, they fought to win, no matter the cost. "All systems are operational," Lieutenant Mark Daniels reported from his station, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "We're ready to land." Captain Lee nodded but said nothing. She didn't need to. She knew what was at stake. "Prepare the troops," she ordered. "This won't be a simple rescue mission. We're going to make sure the Vrakash know we're here." Below, on the surface of the planet, the Tharkor leaders watched the human ship with a mix of awe and anxiety. They had never seen anything like it before. Their ships were elegant, crafted for peace and diplomacy, not war. The Vanguard was the complete opposite. It was built for battle, its design hardened by the scars of a long history of conflict. General Zothar, the Tharkor military leader, was the first to speak after a long silence. "Are we sure this is the right choice? One ship, no matter how powerful, cannot defeat the Vrakash alone." Counselor Xena, ever the optimist, replied, "We have no choice. General, if this human ship is as powerful as they say, it might just be our only chance." The Tharkor had no illusions about the situation. The Vrakash were ruthless conquerors who had razed entire worlds. They would not stop until the Tharkor were either dead or enslaved. Yet, when they had reached out for help, they hadn't expected anything quite like the humans. "Let's meet them," General Zothar said, his voice firm but uncertain. "If we are to survive, we must trust them, at least for now." The Tharkor leaders gathered outside their command center, their faces tense as they waited for the humans to make their move. The landing of the Vanguard was slow, almost deliberate, as if the ship was testing the ground beneath it. When the ship finally touched down with a low rumble, dust and debris swirled around it, adding to the dramatic tension in the air. For a long moment, no one moved. The Tharkor stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. The ship's dark hull loomed before them, intimidating and foreign. The door to the ship opened slowly, revealing a ramp that descended to the ground. The first figure to step out was a tall, imposing human figure, a woman in a dark uniform. Her posture rigid, her expression unreadable. Captain Rachel Lee. She walked down the ramp without hesitation, her boots clicking sharply against the metal surface of the landing zone. Her crew followed, an organized team of soldiers and engineers, all prepared for battle. The sight of the humans was enough to stir a mix of emotions among the Tharkor. Some were relieved, others fearful. They had asked for help, but what kind of help had they truly summoned? Greetings, Captain Lee said, her voice calm but carrying authority. I am Captain Rachel Lee of the Human Alliance. We've come to help you fight the Vrakash. Her words were direct, and there was no hesitation in them. The Tharkor leaders exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of how to respond. They had expected something more formal, perhaps more diplomatic. But the humans were not here to waste time. They had come to fight, and they made no effort to hide it. I trust you are ready for battle, Captain Lee continued, her eyes scanning the Tharkor assembly. The Vrakash are not going to wait for us to prepare. They will be here soon. We are ready, General Zothar replied, stepping forward to meet her. But we are not warriors. Then you will fight alongside us, Captain Lee interrupted, her voice firm. We fight for survival, not for honor or diplomacy. The Vrakash will destroy everything you know unless we stop them. The Tharkor were taken aback by her bluntness, but they quickly understood. The humans were not here for a long, drawn-out war of negotiation. They had come for one purpose, to end the Vrakash threat. They had no time for politeness. Only action, then. Let us work together, General Zothar said, nodding. We will follow your lead. As the human soldiers began to set up their equipment, preparing for the coming battle, Captain Lee turned to her crew. Make sure all systems are ready. This is not going to be easy. The Vrakash will test us, but we will not back down. One of the Tharkor officers, a young woman named Rilia, hesitantly approached Captain Lee. What if we fail? What if we cannot stop the Vrakash? What happens to our world? Captain Lee looked down at the young Tharkor, her expression softening for just a moment. We won't fail, she said, her voice steady. Not if we fight together. This war is far from over, but we will win. We have to. Rilia nodded, though uncertainty still lingered in her eyes. The Tharkor had lived their lives in peace for so long that they found it hard to imagine victory through war. But the humans were different. They were people who thrived on survival. They didn't know how to give up. As the sun began to set on the Tharkor homeworld, the humans and their new allies prepared for what would be the most difficult fight of their lives. The Vrakash were coming, and the Tharkor had no choice but to fight, side by side with the Deathworlders. The sky was dark as night fell over the Tharkor planet, and the air was heavy with anticipation. Captain Rachel Lee stood on the command deck of the Vanguard, her eyes scanning the empty space outside the windows. The humans had arrived with one goal, to stop the Vrakash from destroying another civilization. The Tharkor, despite their technological advancements, were helpless in the face of such an overwhelming force. They had no experience in war, no idea how to fight back against an enemy like the Vrakash. But now, with the humans on their side, they had no choice. It was time to fight or lose everything. Captain, the Vrakash fleet is approaching, Lieutenant Daniels reported, his voice steady but filled with the weight of the moment. They're not far. We have maybe a few hours before they arrive. Understood, Captain Lee said, her voice calm but cold with determination. Prepare the crew. We don't have time to waste. She turned and looked at the group of Tharkor commanders who had joined them on the ship. Their faces were filled with uncertainty, but also a sense of hope that the humans could deliver what they had promised. Their world had been saved by a single ship, and now they would face the Vrakash together. We need to move quickly, General Zothar said, his voice gruff but strong. I've never seen anything like the Vrakash. They are ruthless, and they won't show mercy. Neither will we, Captain Lee replied. We don't have the luxury of mercy in war. We fight to win. General Zothar nodded, though his doubt was still evident. He had been trained to lead peaceful missions, to negotiate, and to resolve conflicts without violence. But the humans were different. They were used to war, used to fighting with no rules. The Tharkor, while not warriors, would have to adjust quickly or they would perish. Do you have a strategy, Captain? General Zothar asked. We've already begun preparing. Captain Lee answered. Our first priority is to stop their advance. We'll use our planetary defenses to hold them off while we take down their leadership. Once the Vrakash are thrown into disarray, we'll strike. This battle won't be won with kindness or honor. We'll use their own tactics against them. If we want to save your world, we must be ruthless." The Tharkor commanders exchanged glances. It was a strategy they had never imagined, but in this moment, they knew they had no choice. The humans' experience in war was unmatched, and the Tharkor had to trust them. On the surface, the Tharkor were already preparing for battle. The planet's military forces were a mix of soldiers and engineers, not fighters. But they were doing their best. They had never expected to fight an enemy like the Vrakash. Their ships, though fast and powerful, were no match for the Vrakash. Warships, the humans, however, had shown them that size and power didn't always matter. What mattered was strategy. The Tharkor soldiers began to line up their weapons advanced but untested in real combat. The humans had brought powerful machines of war, including heavy cannons and armored vehicles, and they quickly began to set up around the Tharkor cities. The humans' calm efficiency was contagious, and even the Tharkor began to feel a sense of determination. As night fell, the distant rumble of a Vrakash fleet grew louder. The first wave of enemy ships appeared on the horizon, their dark silhouettes barely visible against the stars. The Tharkor watched in silence as the Vrakash fleet approached. "We don't have much time," General Zothar said. "We need to prepare now." The humans moved into position, setting up defenses in key areas around the city. Captain Lee gave orders with a quickness and confidence that reassured the Tharkor. She didn't hesitate. Every move was precise. Every decision was calculated. They were ready for this fight. When the Vrakash fleet entered the atmosphere, they immediately began bombarding the cities, their ships launching missiles that tore through the Tharkor defenses. Buildings collapsed in fiery explosions, and the ground shook with each impact. The humans, however, had anticipated this. "Return fire," Captain Lee ordered, her voice steady. "Use the anti-air weapons. Target the enemy's ships directly." The Vanguard fired its weapons, sending powerful blasts toward the Vrakash fleet. The human ships moved in unison, their guns and missiles creating a deadly rain of destruction. The Vrakash ships fired back, their weapons powerful enough to tear through anything in their path. But the humans were quick, dodging and firing back with deadly precision. The Tharkor stood in awe as they watched the humans fight. The battle was intense, but the humans had a skill and ferocity that the Tharkor had never seen before. The Vanguard took down several Vrakash ships with its superlaser, and the enemy fleet began to falter. For the first time, the Tharkor felt the tide of the battle shift in their favor. "Keep the pressure on them," Captain Lee said. Her eyes focused on the battle. "We need to take out their command ship. It's the heart of their fleet. If we destroy it, they'll crumble." General Zothar looked at her, unsure. "How do you plan to do that?" "Leave it to us," Captain Lee said, her voice cold and confident. "The Vrakash may be strong, but we are stronger." The humans moved into action, their ships weaving in and out of enemy fire with a precision that was almost impossible to follow. The Vrakash were no longer the hunters, they were the prey. The humans had turned the tables, and they weren't stopping. They fought with a single purpose: to crush the Vrakash and save the Tharkor. As the battle continued, explosions lit up the sky. The Tharkor watched as the humans fought with unmatched intensity. It was no longer just about survival. It was about defeating the Vrakash once and for all. But even as the humans pressed forward, General Zothar couldn't shake his unease. The Tharkor had joined the fight, but they were still learning the rules of this brutal new world, the world of war. The humans had their way, and it was clear that it would not be easy for the Tharkor to adapt. Yet, in this moment, the general knew that they had no other choice. The Vrakash would stop at nothing to destroy everything they held dear. And for the first time, the Tharkor were learning what it meant to fight. The battle was far from over. The Vrakash were fierce, and the Tharkor were still learning how to fight. But with the humans by their side, they had hope. They were fighting for their world, their homes, their future, and they would not give up without a fight. The battle raged on, fierce and unrelenting. Explosions lit up the sky, the sounds of war echoing across the battlefield. The Tharkor had never seen anything like it before. No other race in the galaxy fought with the same intensity and strategy as the humans. Yet, despite their advanced technology and war tactics, the Vrakash were still relentless, pushing the Tharkor forces back with each passing minute. On the command deck of the Vanguard, Captain Rachel Lee stood, her eyes locked on the chaos unfolding outside. She had seen many battles, but this one felt different. The Tharkor, though brave, were still learning how to fight like the humans. It was a hard lesson, but it was a necessary one. We need to keep up the pressure, Captain Lee said, turning to Lieutenant Daniels. The Vrakash are strong, but they are not invincible. We just need to break their will to fight. Lieutenant Daniels nodded. We're doing everything we can, Captain, but they keep coming. I know, Lee replied. We need to hit them harder. Down on the surface. General Zothar watched the battle unfold with a growing sense of unease. The Tharkor had been fighting side by side with the humans for hours now, and though they had made progress, it was clear they were still outmatched. The Tharkor were warriors in their own right, but their people had always relied on diplomacy and peace. War was not their strength. He stood beside Counselor Xena, watching the humans move swiftly and decisively, directing their forces with military precision. The humans, they fight differently. We are not like them. Counselor Xena glanced at him, and yet we are fighting alongside them. If we are to survive, we must adapt. General Zothar felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Adapting to war was not something that could be done in a few hours. He had seen the carnage of battle and knew that the Tharkor were not ready for this kind of conflict, but there was no turning back now. We don't have a choice, Zothar muttered. The Vrakash will destroy us all unless we stand with the humans. The Tharkor forces continued to fight, but with each wave of Vrakash soldiers, it became more evident that their tactics were not enough. The humans, however, were relentless. Their tactics were simple but effective: strike hard, strike fast, and strike first. They showed no mercy, and it was starting to work out as the hours wore on. Captain Lee ordered the humans to focus on weakening the Vrakash leadership. Without their leaders, the enemy would fall into chaos. It was a bold move, but it was their best chance of victory. In the distance, a massive Vrakash command ship floated ominously, surrounded by smaller warships. It was their most important target. If the humans could destroy it, the Vrakash would lose their coordination and their forces would crumble. But it was no easy task. The ship was heavily armored and well-guarded. Captain Lee didn't hesitate. Prepare the strike team, she ordered. We're taking down that command ship. The Vanguard's guns roared as they opened fire on the Vrakash ships. The humans' precision was unmatched, their shots cutting through the air like deadly arrows. The Vrakash returned fire, but the humans were too fast, dodging and weaving around the enemy's blasts. On the ground, General Zothar and his forces followed the humans' lead. They adapted quickly, using human tactics to flank the Vrakash positions. The Tharkor soldiers worked together with the humans, providing cover for each other as they advanced toward the Vrakash command center. The humans were merciless. Every time a Vrakash soldier fell, the humans pushed forward, taking control of key positions and cutting off enemy reinforcements. The Tharkor watched in awe as the humans moved with perfect synchronization, their discipline and efficiency on full display. We're doing it, Counselor Xena whispered, almost to herself. We're actually holding them off. Zothar didn't speak, but he could feel it till the tide of battle was slowly turning. The Vrakash were strong, but they were not unbeatable. The Tharkor, working with the humans, were beginning to push them back. But it wasn't just the fighting that was changing. The Tharkor were beginning to change, too. General Zothar found himself adopting the humans' tactics, no longer just defending, but attacking. His soldiers were learning to think like the humans, to strike first and ask questions later. It was a new way of thinking, a brutal way of thinking, but it was the only way to survive in this galaxy. As the day wore on, the Vrakash began to retreat, their forces faltering under the relentless pressure from the humans and Tharkor. But Captain Lee knew it was not over yet. The Vrkash were still dangerous, and their leadership had to be eliminated if victory was to be ensured. She turned to General Zothar, who had been fighting alongside the humans. "We're going for the command ship," she said. "Are you with us?" Zothar hesitated for a moment, his mind racing. He had never thought of his people as warriors, but now he was fighting as one. The humans had shown him what it meant to fight for survival. "I am with you," he said, his voice firm. "Let's end this." The two of them led the charge. Toward the Vrkash command ship, the humans and Tharkor worked in unison, pushing through the final line of enemy defenses. The Vrkash fought back fiercely, but they were no match for the combined strength of the humans and Tharkor. Captain Lee's team broke through the final line of defense and reached the heart of the command ship with a single, devastating strike. They destroyed the Vrkash leadership. The remaining enemy forces scattered, their once strong morale shattered. As the battle subsided, the survivors gathered on the battlefield. The Tharkor had fought side by side with the humans, and though it had been a hard-fought battle, they had won. The Vrkash had been defeated, and the Tharkor had their world back. General Zothar looked around at the humans, who were already preparing for their next move. They were tired, but they weren't finished. Captain Lee stood nearby, giving orders, her face calm despite the chaos of the day. She turned to him, and for the first time, General Zothar saw something in her eyes: respect. "Thank you," Zothar said, his voice sincere. "You saved us." Captain Lee nodded. "We're not finished yet, but you've earned the right to stand with us." The Tharkor had learned a new way of fighting, one that would stay with them for generations, and in the process, they had formed an unlikely alliance with the humans, one that would change the course of their history forever. The Vrkash had been defeated, at least. That's what the Tharkor thought. The victory had been hard-won, and the humans had proven themselves true allies. But as the smoke cleared from the battlefield, a deep unease began to settle over the Tharkor. Something didn't feel right. The humans had shown no mercy, but they had also made it clear that they weren't finished. The war was far from over. Captain Rachel Lee stood at the front of the vanguard, staring out at the still-burning remains of the Vrkash ships. The battle was won, but the cost had been high. Thousands of soldiers, both Tharkor and human, had fallen. The Vrkash were not easily defeated, and though they had made progress, it was clear that the real fight had just begun. "Captain, we received new intel," Lieutenant Daniels said, his voice tense. "There's something we missed, Captain." We turned to face him, raising an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "We thought the Vrkash were just a warlord faction," Daniels continued. "But there's more, much more. The Vrkash are part of a larger invasion force, one that spans the galaxy. They've been systematically destroying entire civilizations. The Tharkor were just one of their targets." We felt a cold shiver run down her spine. "So this isn't over?" Daniels shook his head. "No, Captain. This is just the beginning." On the surface, General Zothar stood beside Counselor Xena, his expression grim. The victory had been hard-won, but he knew in his heart that the Vrkash were only one part of a much larger threat. The Vrkash might have been ruthless, but the true force behind them was something far more dangerous, something the Tharkor had never seen before. "We've won the battle, but the war isn't over," General Zothar said, his voice steady. "The Vrkash are just the first wave. We need to prepare for what comes next." Counselor Xena nodded, her face pale. "What do we do now?" "We need to learn more about these invaders," Zothar replied. "We must find out who is really behind the Vrkash and prepare for the fight ahead." Captain Lee gathered her officers and the Tharkor leadership in the briefing room. Aboard the Vanguard, the atmosphere was tense as everyone awaited the next steps. The humans and Tharkor had fought side by side, but the reality of what was coming began to sink in. This wasn't just about defending the Tharkor homeworld anymore. It was about survival, galactic survival. "We've learned something," Captain Lee began, her voice commanding attention. "The Vrkash are not alone. They're part of a much larger invasion force, one that's been sweeping across the galaxy. We've only seen the tip of the iceberg, General." Zothar clenched his fists, his expression darkening. So they are not just after our world, they are after every world they can conquer. Exactly, Captain Lee said. And the worst part is, we don't know who's truly leading this invasion. The Vrakash were just their scouts, their foot soldiers. The real power lies elsewhere. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the gravity of the situation. The Vrakash had been brutal, but they were just the beginning. There were worse enemies out there, and they were coming. We need to act fast, Captain Lee continued. If we want to stop this, we have to find out where the invasion is coming from and take the fight to them. The Tharkor leaders exchanged uneasy glances. For the first time, they realized the full scale of the war they had entered. The Vrakash were just the start. The Tharkor, who had long avoided conflict, now found themselves in the midst of a galaxy-spanning war that they had no preparation for. We don't have the resources to fight an entire invasion, General Zothar said, his voice heavy with concern. Even with the humans' help, we are outmatched. Captain Lee's gaze sharpened. We will find a way. We have no choice, Counselor. Xena stood and looked at the humans. You've helped us survive the first wave. But we need more than just your weapons. We need your knowledge. What can you tell us about this invasion? Captain Lee nodded. The Vrakash were just the front line. Behind them, there are far more dangerous forces at work. They've been conquering worlds for years, and now they've set their sights on the Tharkor. But if we can hit them hard enough, we might be able to disrupt their plans. We have to strike before they can regroup, General. Zothar said, but where do we strike first? We don't know where the real power is yet, Captain Lee admitted. But we can start by hitting their supply lines. If we cut off their resources, they'll be forced to retreat. We might not be able to stop them all at once, but we can slow them down. General Zothar nodded, a fire igniting in his eyes. Then, we'll hit them where it hurts. The next few days were spent preparing for the next phase of the war. The humans and Tharkor worked together, forming a plan to strike at the heart of the Vrakash supply lines. It was a risky move, but it was their best chance. Captain Lee's crew had the experience needed to execute the operation, but the Tharkor had the knowledge of their enemies' movements. As the preparations continued, Captain Lee found herself standing at the edge of the Vanguard's command deck, gazing out at the stars. The humans had always been fighters, but even they had never faced anything like this. The galaxy was changing, and the humans knew that they had to adapt or be destroyed. Captain, Lieutenant Daniels said, approaching her from behind. We're ready for the mission, but I need to ask, do you think we can really stop them? Captain Lee turned to face him, her expression hardening. I don't know, Daniels, but we're not giving up without a fight if we're going to survive. We need to take the fight to them, and we need to do it now. As the Vanguard prepared for the next phase of the war, the Tharkor stood alongside the humans, ready for whatever came next. The true face of their enemy had been revealed, and it was much worse than they had ever imagined. But with the humans by their side, they were ready to face whatever the galaxy threw at them. For the first time, the Tharkor understood that survival in this galaxy wasn't about diplomacy or peace. It was about fighting for your life and for the lives of those you cared about. The war was far from over, but they were no longer alone, and together, they would fight until the very end. The Vanguard was ready. Captain Rachel Lee stood in the command room, her eyes scanning the vast emptiness of space. It was a rare moment of stillness amidst the chaos of war. They had a plan now, a chance to strike a blow against the Vrakash invasion force that had been sweeping through the galaxy. But despite the preparations, Captain Lee couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. They had fought fiercely together with the Tharkor, but there was no certainty in war, only the hope that their strategy would work. Captain, Lieutenant Daniels said, his voice breaking through her thoughts. The fleet is in position. We're ready to launch. Lee nodded, her gaze still fixed on the stars. I know. Let's get this over with. On the surface of the Tharkor homeworld, General Zothar and the Tharkor forces were busy preparing for the most critical operation of their existence. They had never fought a war like this before, and the humans' relentless tactics had given them the first real hope they'd felt in days. But as the Tharkor soldiers readied their weapons and made their final adjustments, a sense of unease hung in the air. The Vrkash were strong. The battle ahead would test everything they had learned. General Zothar stood at the front of his command center, watching as his soldiers organized and moved into position. "Remember what the humans taught us," he said to the soldiers. "We fight with purpose. We fight to win." The Tharkor soldiers nodded, understanding the weight of the battle ahead. There would be no turning back. The humans had made it clear that they would lead the attack. But the Tharkor were not going to sit back. They had learned too much from the humans to stand idly by. They would fight side by side with the humans. Every step of the way. As the operation began, the Vanguard led the charge, its massive cannons firing into the heart of the Vrkash fleet. The battle was fierce from the start. The Vrkash retaliated with full force, their weapons tearing into the human ships and the Tharkor defenses. But Captain Lee had anticipated this. She knew the Vrkash would strike back hard. The key was to keep pressing, to hit them where they were weakest, and to never let up. "We'll hit their command ship first," Captain Lee said, her voice firm. "Over the comms. That's where their leadership is. Take it down, and the rest will fall apart." The humans moved in, their ships weaving through the chaos of enemy fire. The Tharkor followed closely, their forces attacking with newfound determination. The Tharkor were not just fighting to protect their planet anymore. They were fighting for the future of their people and for the survival of the galaxy. The Vrkash were no strangers to fighting dirty. They launched waves of smaller ships to overwhelm the human and Tharkor forces, but the humans adapted quickly, coordinating their attacks with precision. Every move was calculated, every strike measured. It was the humans' ability to work as a cohesive unit that set them apart. On the surface, the Tharkor soldiers were gaining ground, but they were met with fierce resistance. The Vrkash had fortified their positions well, but the humans had taught the Tharkor how to be relentless. They pushed forward, never slowing down. It was a test of endurance, and neither side was willing to give in. General Zothar was in the thick of the fighting, his once doubtful heart now filled with a sense of purpose. The Tharkor had learned how to fight, and they were fighting for their future. The humans had shown them that there was no room for hesitation in war. Either you fought or you lost. As the battle continued, Captain Lee and her crew aboard the Vanguard were making their final push toward the Vrkash command ship. The fleet was under constant attack, but Lee's resolve remained unshaken. The human warship moved swiftly through the chaos, its advanced weaponry tearing through the Vrkash defenses. The Tharkor followed closely behind, their ships attacking. With renewed ferocity, target their shield generators, Captain Lee ordered. "Once we take those out, we go for the bridge." The Vanguard fired a series of powerful shots, the explosion from each blast shaking the enemy ship. The Vrkash command ship faltered, its once impenetrable shields beginning to buckle under the pressure. It was a small victory, but a crucial one. "We've got their shields down," Lieutenant Daniels reported. "Captain, we can go in for the kill." Captain Lee gave a sharp nod. "Do it now." With that, the Vanguard unleashed its full firepower. A barrage of missiles and energy blasts aimed directly at the Vrkash command ship. The explosion was massive, lighting up the sky as the enemy ship crumbled. The Vrkash forces scattered, their once coordinated attacks now thrown into disarray. On the surface, General Zothar and his soldiers saw the explosion in the sky, and a cheer erupted from the Tharkor ranks. The Vrkash were losing their grip. Their leadership had been shattered, and their forces were in retreat. But Captain Lee knew it wasn't over yet. The Vrkash might have lost their command ship, but they were still a dangerous enemy. They would regroup, and when they did, they would come back stronger. The war wasn't won by just defeating one ship, it was won by breaking the enemy's spirit, by showing them that they could be beaten. "We're not done yet," Lee said to her crew, her voice cold with determination. "We've won a battle, but the war continues. Let's make sure they know they've made a mistake by ever coming here." The Vanguard was already moving toward the next target, its engines firing up as it prepared for the next wave of attack. The humans were relentless, and they would not stop until the Vrkash were driven from the galaxy. On the surface, General Zothar watched the retreating Vrakash ships with a newfound sense of hope. The Tharkor had done more than survive. They had fought back, and for the first time in their history, they were standing as equals alongside the humans. The alliance they had formed was a strong one, and Zothar knew that together, they could face anything. "We've done it," Counselor Xena said, her voice filled with awe. "We've actually done it?" General Zothar nodded. "Yes, but the real fight is still ahead of us. We must be ready for whatever comes next." As the dust settled and the Tharkor forces began to regroup, General Zothar turned to look at the humans. He had once doubted them, but now he understood. They were not just fighters, they were survivors. And they had taught the Tharkor what it truly meant to fight for their future. The battle was not over, but the Tharkor now had a fighting chance. With the humans by their side, they would continue to push back the Vrakash and whatever other forces came their way. Together, they would face the future, and together, they would win.